Hello and welcome to BharatShakti.in. I'm Brigadier Chatterji, editor BharatShakti.in. We've already had one coverage of the battle going on in Ukraine, and we'll continue with the Ukraine story today. What's the status now? What's likely to be the intentions of the Russians in Ukraine? That's our primary focus. We'll also attend to the humanitarian crisis that's erupted in Ukraine. For this discussion, I have with me Lieutenant General PR Shankar. General Shankar is a retired Director General Artillery. He is currently a professor in IIT Chennai. Welcome, General.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks for calling me over. It'll be interesting to see after all this war has entered its 12th day and taking different hues.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that we have to talk about. But General, first and foremost, if you could just tell our viewers, what is the current status really? All the three thrusts that the Russians have had from the north, Belarus, or from the east, or from the south, from the sea. What's the status right now of Russian troops in Ukraine?
The Russians are on the outskirts from the north, or on the outskirts of Kyiv. They've not managed to reach Kyiv as yet. They're trying to encircle it. That huge convoy which was supposed to, reach Kyiv has got stuck due to logistical issues, and probably the Ukrainians are also ambushing them. In the east, they made some advance into Kharkiv, and there's intense fighting going on to get hold of Kharkiv. And if you see the areas in that light pink areas which are being controlled by the Russians. In the south, the Donbass area, south and the east, Donbass area, any case was with the Russian controlled, I won't say Russian controlled, Russian backed rebels. Now from the south, the thrust from Crimea, they've taken over Kherson, and they're further going towards the east with the aim of getting to Odisha. The moment they get to Odisha, that they would have controlled the entire Black Sea coast, right, and denied Ukraine any sea access. They're also going further to the towards Mariupol. The moment they take Mariupol, they would have linked up with the Donetsk area, and they've also gone up to Zaporozhye, where they've got hold of the nuclear power plant, about which we will talk a little later. So in effect, if you see in the south, they made some considerable progress. And in the next day or two, if they get hold of Odisha, and then the entire Black Sea coast is with them, and they would have got a contiguous area right up to Donetsk and the Luhansk area, right? But it's at the north where they're having a few issues. We just focus on a few issues. The Russians seem to have changed their plan from the initial one to the later one. So they're having this problem of changing horses midstream with their plans. So there are issues. Their morale and training doesn't seem to be that great as reports indicate. They're having great logistics issues. Surprisingly, they have not come out with their air power fully, right? Why, we don't know. And there's a lot of brute force being applied. And but then one thing one has to say, that the Russian forces seem to be pretty well equipped, and they've got a lot of resolve. If you look at it from the Ukrainian side, now it's very clear that they're on their own, but they've got tremendously motivated. The wherewithal is limited, but with the wherewithal they're being innovative, they're well trained, and their side of the narrative, as we discussed in the last episode, is what is taking over. The Russian narrative is just not coming through. This is where we stand at the end of the on the 12th, 13th day. We can any issues we could discuss.
No, what you said actually, what I get is the entire coastline is going to be denied to the Ukrainians. That's one of the major Russian aims it works out. And they'll link up with Russian-dominated areas to the east. And this northern thrust towards Kiev has got stuck, and nobody really knows why is it stuck so badly. What's the reason? Is it logistics or is it something else?
Basically, because, sir, I think Russians came in with a plan to finish this whole operation within 2 to 3 days, and now that has not happened. They have to reinforce forces and all that, and they got stuck. There's another factor which is coming out. In this season, this is a season where the ground is hard, and the thaw sets in. end February, March, right? And when the thaw sets in, you can't do cross-country move. So you see, any TV channel you see long lines of mech columns stuck on main roads. They're not able to move out. They're not able to shake out. Though virtually there, so it's just traffic jams, logistic problems, and getting ambushed. And it appears also that the Ukrainians have blown up a lot of bridges, so they're just going at crawl speed. And whatever is happening in the along the northern thrust line is going in slow motion. Whereas the Ukrainians seem to have some degree of cross-country mobility because they are going light.
Right. Okay, Dil, let's leave the war fighting a little behind now, little to us, little beyond the scope. And let's talk about the humanitarian crisis a little bit. A huge humanitarian crisis. Till the last minute, Ukrainians did not expect this, perhaps. And today we find refugees flowing out from Ukraine in all directions. Just your opinion on that.
There are two aspects to this humanitarian crisis. The first aspect of the humanitarian crisis, which is well published, all TVs, everything, is the refugee efflux towards Poland, Moldova, Hungary. They're all moving out. Maximum is towards Poland. That's where even our children are being evacuated to. That's crossed 1 million refugees already, and more are going, and in days to come, more can go. The second aspect of the humanitarian disaster is within Ukraine. Now, very soon, Ukraine will run short of food, they'll run short of water, they'll run short of other food supplies and medical aid, right? And what's more, the Russians seem to have a plan of controlling all the power generating systems. So they will be able to control the power also in that area. And in this cold weather, that's going to be an issue for the people within. So there are two aspects of this humanitarian disaster which is unfolding. The third aspect of the humanitarian disaster is that the Russians are now using unrestricted force. And that means a lot of civilian casualties. And that generated its own problems, because I don't think the Ukrainians have that kind of medical capabilities to cope with war casualties as also civilian casualties because of this, right? So I think it's a major, major humanitarian disaster if you put all these three together, which is coming out. Something has to be done.
And as the disaster gets bigger and bigger, actually the opposition to Russian intervention in Ukraine from Ukrainians gets much more sharper, and certainly you find these things called ambushes, etc. will perhaps be more.
Yeah. The Ukrainian feeling is getting hardened.
Definitely.
The feeling of resistance is hardened. You see reports of people coming out on the streets and protesting. That is today, it's a very ambient kind of a thing, maybe unorganized, it's only out of emotive reflex. But sooner or later, this is going to lead into an insurgency situation, an organized insurgency situation.
Right. As I see it, Putin's plans weren't exactly this. He possibly wanted to go in much faster, like we talked about last time. You were yourself floating that idea. You thought he'll go across like he'd done in Georgia. But he's got stuck. But what do you see are his plans ahead now that he's there in Ukraine? He can't leave them halfway either.
Yeah, that I think is a very logical thing. But we first have to understand the current situation from here where we'll go. So we'll do that first. Yeah, if you have a look at the slide, for most of us in India, we don't understand the relationship between Ukraine, USA, and Russia. If you look at it, it is analogous to our own situation with China and India on one side and Nepal in the middle. The same thing there. NATO, USA, and EU on one side, Ukraine in the center, right, and Russia at the bottom. Now let's look at what the.
That's a very interesting comparison that you've given us. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, if you whatever I'm now going to talk of each of this, you transpose it to our situation, it's almost the same. Okay. Now look at it, and this kind of a situation for us in India could evolve in J&K with Pakistan. It could evolve in with China in Bhutan, or it could even come up in Myanmar tomorrow, right? We have more, and this is a very interesting thing which we should understand, the dynamics there, the macro dynamics. Okay, so let's look at the USA and NATO and EU kind of a thing. What do they
Yeah.
want? They want Ukraine to be incorporated into NATO and EU. Okay.
Okay.
Now, USA will continue to support Ukraine with arms, training, finances, and sanctions on Russia. And this is not new. This has been going on since 2014, right? From the Maidan and the coup of that time, it is going on. Okay. USA will support a pro-Western liberal democracy. That is what Zelensky is, or supposed to be, right? There are issues, but we'll not get into that. But it is very clear that they will not deploy troops in Ukraine, and NATO has very clearly said they will not declare a no-fly zone over Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay, because that has got attendant combat implications. They have also very clear that NATO will not escalate the nuclear situation. They are not even going to contend the nuclear situation.
Definitely.
Look, I've heard this is something like a pun. USA and EU will fight this battle to the last Ukrainian. In the same way, no, in the same way which Imran Khan was going to fight for Kashmir till the last Kashmiri. Okay. That's why there's a lot of analogy between what's happening there and us. Okay. Now let us look at the Ukrainian point of view, in the center. Ukraine is a divided nation. It's not a homogeneous nation as it is, because there is and it is also not as it's coming out in the narrative that there's no internal opposition to whatever Ukraine is doing. There are people who who are not for whatever is happening in Ukraine by this current Ukrainian government. So let's not think that it's a homogeneous idea. Now, Ukrainians will fight the Russians, and the situation will generate, and it will generate into a Western-sponsored insurgency. But the fact is, Ukrainians have limited capability to sustain this operation, and eventually Russia will prevail militarily. What will happen politically, we'll see. There's a humanitarian disaster which has commenced, we spoke about, right? And the people, economy, and infrastructure is going to be wrecked within Ukraine wherever Russia has carried out its operations. And it's also very clear now that the Ukraine wants to join NATO and EU, and EU has in principle agreed that they'll take them. Now let's get to the Russian part of it, because there's a third circle which we have to speak of. For Russia, NATO and for Russia, Ukraine being in NATO is an existential threat, because the moment NATO borders come to Russia, it's an existential threat, and it is totally unacceptable to Russia. And this is a core principle which they're not going to compromise on. Okay, they want Ukraine to be part of the Russian sphere of influence, and at best they'll accept it as a buffer. And this has got a large implication for us with our neighbors. And about this we have written, and it teaches us a lesson as to what we need to do with our neighbors ahead. Both to have the neighbors on our side and not to get into a Russian kind of a situation. Right. Russia has already placed its nuclear card on the table. It has Chinese support. And as we see historically, the sanctions might or might not have value, but that is to be seen ahead. Immediately, they have got no value. Okay, they'll go to all lengths to protect their core interests. I've already said that. Okay, Putin has threatened Ukraine with a loss of statehood. That means a lot. That means he's prepared to go the whole length. That intent has said. He's also stated that the EU and US sanctions, they amount to declaration of war, and any no-fly zone means it is a combatant area, then he's free to do what he wants to do. But one thing we have to realize, though Russia has got the numerical superiority, it does not have the capability to militarily or financially hold, Ukraine. Because we need to remember, Russian economy is just $1.9 trillion. It's not even the top 10 economies of the world. So financial thing is, this thing. But it will use unrestricted force. So this is where we stand. Now, with this as a background, let us see what are the options from here on. Right? Okay, let's take the first option. Before I took in the first option, Putin has already given a proposal that, look, we can end this war if my demands are met. What are his demands we just discussed? Right? So the bottom line is Ukraine cannot be part of EU or NATO. The first option is if the demands are met, the whole thing stops here and then negotiations start and he'll get off Ukraine. Right? One thing is also clear that which I said and which I will keep reinforcing. I don't think Russia has the intent to continue to remain in Ukraine forever. At some point, there has to be some negotiation. So the option first is: will the negotiation start here? As it is, the negotiations have started. That will come about later. The second option is that Russia will continue with its operation and till at least the line from Kyiv to Mariupol or Kherson is attained, along with the entire Black Sea coast, and somewhere half the whole country gets divided into half, with the democratic forces on the west and Russian-controlled forces on the east. So this is the second option, which could be the end result. And the third option is that Russia could take over entire Ukraine. But this is a difficult option because, firstly, you have to militarily capture entire Ukraine, and that places Russia at the doorstep of EU, which might not be acceptable to NATO and EU. So let us see what are the overall implications. Okay, right. As of today, negotiations are already on. The third round of negotiations are on, and Putin has put his card on the table. The final negotiations or the definitive negotiations, I feel, will come only once Kyiv and Kharkiv fall. Then there is some heft. A capital has fallen, a major city has fallen, all that. The core issue with as it is, this is it. If this gets resolved, the whole thing will go. There is also a good chance that Donbass, Crimea, and the contiguous areas will become eventually part of Russia if something doesn't come out clearly. Now, the choice, the thing that it will proceed from option 2, that is half of Ukraine, to the rest of thing, it will be incremental and not likely in a hurry, because this is not the time to carry out major operations when the thaw is on and the whole place is a mucky area. Right? Russia will not hesitate to continue using maximum force. And this is a time when Russia will start selling nationalism to itself. We have to understand, right from Stalin to Khrushchev to anyone, irrespective of what Russia has done, there's been no case where they have turned against their own leader. So Russia will stand by, the Russians will stand by Putin. Okay, this is where it is. So we'll have to see how it goes.
Right now, you've given the story. Well, I would say the Russian side of it, the Ukrainian side of it. Just one more small issue related, and if you can keep it a little precise, what is the ultimate US intent really?
Look, the US intent is to have its own government, or a pro-US, pro-West government in Ukraine, and limit Russia and bottle up Russia. And eventually, if it can bottle up Russia, it'll further its longer aim is to then it can turn to China. If it can take out one adversary and bottle it up, and then it can turn to concentrate its own whole
on China
effort
totally.
on China. And they will try to break this axis, or rather as the pact between China and Russia.
Right. Okay. Can we talk about this attack on the nuclear power plant, Zaporizhzhia, whether it was a very responsible act to do? Initially, there was a talk about a lot of weaponry being used over there. Now, we are not talking anymore about cluster bombs, but just that there's some, firepower attacks on that particular.
See, there is a plan, very clear plan emanating from Russia. When they have taken over the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. There are 4 nuclear plants in Ukraine, 2 in the west and 2 in the east. Okay, there's one further to the south called the South Ukrainian plant along the Dnieper. They've taken Zaporozhye, they're going to take that. They're also taking over all the coal-fired plants. In effect, as I mentioned earlier, Russia seems to be wanting to control the entire electricity grid of Ukraine. And that will be used to control the Ukrainian people. Right? They have very clearly undertaken an offensive to take over this. Yeah, there's been some damage, whatever that is, but I think they've done it. My own view is they've not done it indiscriminately. Because after all, Russia also knows the implications of destroying a nuclear plant. They've carried out, in any plant, there will be some mishaps. It has happened, but I think it's under control. The question, which the larger question is, what will IEA do? How will this nuclear plant be monitored? What will be the radiation levels and how it will progress further? Has Russia catered for running this plant and controlling it? These are the issues which are going to roll out in days ahead. But it has been done with a plan. That's my view.
It does look like it's quite under control, and I think Ukraine's 54% of the power is from nuclear power. So obviously, if you have a control on even on the nuclear power plants only, you will have enough control on the Ukrainian business, life, everything.
Yeah, everything.
Like one last question, this for our viewers' interest, really. They would like to know what's the status of the Indian students? How many have we able to pull out? What is the status in Ukraine right now? If you can throw some light.
See, by and large, I think most of our students have vacated, areas of Kharkiv and all that. Some reports are there that in a place called Sumy, they're still stuck.
Yeah.
Right. Now, Indian government is doing its best. What more can the government do, right? And we brought most of them back. We've lost a couple of them. It's unfortunate. My heart goes out to them and their families. But when you compare ourselves with the other countries which have carried out evacuation, and I think we've done a far better job. Very well. And the government deserves, compliments for having done this. There will always be shortcomings. There will always be cribs. But in a situation like this, where you don't have any great presence, you don't have any great infrastructure, you don't have that kind of a thing, what more can you do? And a situation which has just evolved overnight into a conflict zone. Because if you remember, even the Ukrainians didn't believe there will be any action till the day it happened. So how can Indian government foresee and start evacuating beforehand? Right? So I think we've done a good job. We shouldn't stretch it beyond a limit.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you. I think there is a very lucid again and talk like it's always there when you come on our platform.
Oh, thank you.
Come on our platform, and I'm sure our viewers have enjoyed it, and those who haven't really logged on will log on and enjoy it. Thank you again, Jen. And thank you, viewers. Thanks for logging on, and please keep logging on like this whenever you find time, and you will find interesting coverage of incidents and events that are of relevance to all of us. Thank you.